Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of NGBE Live. In this episode, we have two phenomenal guests for you. We have Doug Parker from the Angular team, who will be talking about Angular CLI version 10. And we have Natalia Venditto, who will be talking about Angular Schematics. Welcome, Doug and Natalia.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Before we kick in, however, let's meet our panelists for today. Some Vloeberghs, Yannick Houbrix.
Hi, everybody.
Bonnie Brennan.
Hello.
And Mateus Carniatto.
Hello.
So welcome, Sam, Yannick, Bonnie, and Matt. All right, our first guest, Doug Parker, joined the Angular team last November as a software engineer on the tooling team. The Angular team just realized version 10, which includes some cool new changes to the CLI and tooling infrastructure. In this talk, Doug will cover the new changes, how they affect developers like us, the motivations behind them, and how to best take advantage of them. Doug has agreed to taking questions after his talk. Thank you, Doug. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat below on the YouTube page. And then Yannick will pick them up and we'll make sure they get asked during the Q&A after the talk. And just a reminder, you can also give applause in the live chat. So if you like what you're seeing and hearing, make sure to also give applause there. With that, let's give it up for Doug Parker.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate that that amazing introduction. Let's see. I think we just need to shift over the screen. Fortunately, a lot of people in here, so. There we go. Awesome. So, as I said, thank you so much, Jurgen. Really excited to be here and share with you some of the cool new stuff that we've introduced into the CLI in version 10. As I said, my name's Doug. I've been on the Angular team since about last November-ish. Most of the work that I do on the team is kind of internal to Google, but I've been involved in a lot of the discussions and decisions that went into a lot of the changes that we made in V10. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the changes we made, some of the motivations we had behind them, and how you can get the most out of this new version. So some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to start off with some new CommonJS warnings that are probably going to be the first thing you're going to notice after upgrading. Move on to talking about the strict flag that we've now introduced into the ng-new command, what that does and why you should use it. I'll talk briefly about TypeScript 3.9 and how we've changed our TS config structure. Now, those three topics will take most of the time, but I'll kind of wrap it off with some changes to our default browser support, as well as some deprecations that have happened in V10. So to start with, it's the first thing you're going to notice. Of course, you're going to use the ng update command to update to Angular V10. You'll get all our great migrations, and everything is just going to work out of the box because Angular is amazing that way. But as soon as you run ng build, you're going to notice a warning like this, most likely. You're going to get something like, oh, there's a warning in this file, depends on some dependency, and it'll say CommonJS or AMD dependencies can cause optimization bailouts. So, and we have some links and some more explanation about this, but what exactly is this complaining about? Why do I care as a developer? And why is Angular, cluttering my terminal with this warning? So I wanted to kind of dive into what this is, where it comes from, and what we can do about it. So this relates to a feature called tree shaking, if you're not familiar with that concept, sometimes called dead code elimination. It's essentially the process by which a bundler or a compiler is able to strip out code that isn't being used in a particular bundle. So you can consider that if you have a function that you never call, then it shouldn't even really be included in the build. It shouldn't be shipped to users. It shouldn't be wasting bytes downloading this function that's never called. And tree shaking is the process by which the compiler identifies that code and strips it out. And there are simple examples working with ECMAScript modules. So you can consider that in this case, I'm using traditional import-export syntax, so ESM modules or ECMAScript modules. And here I've got an uncool function that we don't care about that doesn't do anything particularly interesting. And we have another cool function that does something we do care about. And it does, our users love it and provides some really great features for us. I have a separate file where I import both of these, but I only ever call cool. Okay, cool is the one that I really care about. That's the one our users like. Uncool, I don't need that one. And as humans, we can look at this and say like, well, uncool is never actually used anywhere. So really this should be stripped out, right? We shouldn't be shipping uncool to users who are never going to call it. And when a bundler looks over this, it's going to see that, well, uncool is imported here, but it's never actually used in this file. So the bundler is able to strip out this import. That saves us a few bytes, but probably not significant in the grand scheme of things. But because of that, it's now able to evaluate the definitions over here. And it can say that, well, uncool isn't actually referenced in this file, and it's never imported anywhere. So I know that it can never be used. And as such, the bundler knows it's safe to remove, and the bundler will delete it as well. So because of this, we have the bundler that's able to actually strip out this function that was unused and save the user additional bytes. And you might think that one function isn't that big a deal, but you can consider that this one function could use other dependencies, which then use other dependencies and other dependencies. And the transitive dependency nonsense that is NPM and node modules can often be anchored at a single function. And so by removing this one function, we may actually be saving, several hundred kilobytes of dependencies that would no longer be needed. So even removing just one function can have a significant impact on your bundle size. But let's consider the same exact example using CommonJS. And if you're not too familiar with CommonJS, maybe you've heard the term, but just don't fully understand exactly what that's referring to. CommonJS is essentially the module system used by Node. So you'd export things using this Node modules equals, whatever symbols you're trying to export. And you'd use require to import whatever symbols you want to use in the file. This is frequently used in Node.js. It's somewhat proliferated NPM, so you still see this a lot in browser code as well. Basically, anything that kind of predated ECMAScript modules will be using this. And how does the bundler work with the exact same example, but using CommonJS here? So we've got the same uncool and cool functions, and they both get imported, but only cool gets used. When the bundler looks at this, it's going to start the exact same way. And it's going to see, well, uncool isn't actually used here, so I can strip this out. And then it's going to start looking on this side as well. And it's going to say, well, is uncool used anywhere? And a human would say, it's not used anywhere. You can remove it. But when the bundler looks at this, it says, well, uncool actually is used somewhere. It's used right here. And, I can't remove this. I need to make sure that nobody's using module.exports.uncool. And so really the question is, can we delete uncool here? And this turns out to be a pretty hard question to answer, really for tooling and for humans. So we can consider a more specific example where we have just a function foo, it gets exported. In order to tree shake this, the bundler effectively needs to ask the question, is module.exports.foo used? If the answer is yes, then we must keep this around. If the answer is no, it's not used, then we can tree shake it. So essentially, can I tree shake this is an equivalent question to, is it used? And in some cases, this is easy. We can do console.log test. In this scenario, foo isn't really used. You can strip it out. That's probably safe to do. In other cases, console.log module.exports.foo. In that case, it's used. We would need to keep it. And hopefully a bundler could figure that out. That's a pretty straightforward usage. But then we can do something like module.exports string lookup of foo, which is a little bit roundabout, but these two are basically the same thing. I would hope that any bundler worth its salt could probably figure that out. But then we can get even trickier with this of module.exports with the string lookup of oof, and then we split it and reverse it using state-of-the-art ES 2020 string reversal technology. And this, it kind of makes you double take of like, what is this doing? What are we trying to accomplish here? You have to think about it a little bit to really understand what's going on and understand what these functions are doing. Something that tooling isn't really going to have a whole lot of idea what's going on here. But then you can get especially weird. You can do something like this. And this is a whole bunch of nonsense. I wrote this thing, and I don't even know exactly what this is trying to do. And I kind of ask you the same question again. Is module.exports.foo used? And when I look at this, I don't see foo anywhere. I don't see exports anywhere. I do see module. But it says not a module, and it's going into an eval, so we know that this is a safe operation, which is very trustworthy. So really kind of the takeaway here is that answering the question, is module.exports.foo used, is a really hard question to answer. It's difficult for humans. It's even harder for tooling that can't have that kind of contextual understanding of your application. And it makes tree shaking incredibly difficult. And just for the record, that last statement does actually use foo. You would not be able to tree shake it if you included that line. So just in case you didn't believe me. So we can circle back to kind of the original warning. So what exactly is this complaining about? Really what it's saying is that there are symbols in your application that we should be able to tree shake, but we can't because you're using CommonJS. And then CommonJS kind of, it adds those restrictions. It makes it so much harder to tree shake symbols we should otherwise be able to tree shake. And now in V10, Angular is going to start warning us about this on build with this kind of CommonJS or AMD cause optimization bailouts. This does apply to AMD as well. My examples kind of refer to CommonJS, but AMD basically has the same challenges. So how exactly do we fix this? Well, really, we want to be able to use ECMAScript module syntax for all of our files. If you're already writing modern TypeScript, you're probably doing this for the most part in your own files. This is just the traditional import-export keywords in JavaScript. Where this most likely comes up is with your libraries, because we also need to do this for all your transitively included libraries. And that's, this warning is, in this case, is particularly specific to a library. So you want to make sure that you're using libraries that support ESM. If they don't support ESM, then file a bug to them, ask them to support ESM. This is definitely the future of JavaScript and the future of the NPM ecosystem. So we really want to see this gaining more adoption, gaining more traction. It's definitely the future, and you're going to have better optimized bundles. Things are going to load faster. Things are going to be more compatible with tooling. So I definitely want to kind of see the ecosystem moving in this direction. If you really can't, you're really stuck with that CommonJS dependency, definitely step one, file a bug with them. Actually, that is the important step one. Make sure you follow up and try and move this dependency onto ESM. But while you're kind of waiting on that happening, you can use in your angular.json, there's an allowed CommonJS dependencies key where you can list all the packages that, like, yeah, I get it. It's on CommonJS. I'm working on it. Trust me, I'm going to actually follow through with this. And this will at least suppress the warning for the time being while you go through and fix up that dependency. So that said, I'm going to move on from CommonJS and move on to the strict flag that we've introduced with ng-new. ng-new, if you're not familiar with it, is just a command to be able to scaffold out a brand new Angular application from scratch. And it's definitely the best way to get started with Angular today. In V10, we've introduced a brand new strict flag, which essentially opts in the generated project into a slightly more specific configuration, which is a little bit more restrictive and a little bit more adherent to best practices that we've seen throughout the ecosystem. And this flag does a whole bunch of different things, but kind of the first one to dive into, kind of the one it gets its name from a little bit, is that it enables the strict flag in TypeScript and a whole bunch of other flags here. I won't go through all of them for sake of timing, but definitely the most important one is the strict true flag here. That includes things like no implicit any and strict null checks, which in my opinion are the two most important TypeScript flags that should basically be applied onto every project. So I'm super excited to see this land in new Angular projects. We also opt in a couple strictness flags for Angular itself. We enable strict templates where basically previously there were some instances where our type system wasn't quite as accurate as it should have been in Angular templates. So we've now kind of patched that up. And so strict templates is how you enable that stricter typing. We also have strict injection parameters where previously if you forgot a certain annotation, you could have runtime errors with dependency injection. And now we're kind of surfacing that as a compile time error, making you see it a little bit sooner and giving you more specific error message and kind of specifically targeting exactly what's wrong and how you can fix it. So hopefully it should make that development experience a little bit better. We've also added the no any rule to TS-lint. What that does is essentially makes using the any type a lint error. The main reasoning behind that is that we've seen a lot of developers kind of using any as a little bit of a crutch and kind of avoiding the type system when they really should be working with it. And as soon as you use any, you're kind of opting out of all the benefits that TypeScript is giving you. And you're just kind of leaving it up to yourself to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's going to hurt me. And historically, humans are very bad at that. So we want tooling and types to help with this kind of process. In my experience, instead of using any, I would recommend using unknown. Unknown being a much stricter type that basically doesn't let you do anything with it, requires explicit casting, and basically make sure that you don't accidentally shoot yourself in the foot. So I would definitely recommend unknown over any, basically wherever possible. And in my experience, unknown works like 95% of the time. What you really want is unknown. And then only occasionally, and that extra 5% of the time, I'll upgrade it to an any if I really need to. We've also tightened up our bundle budgets a bit. So bundle budgets, if you're not familiar with that particular feature of Angular, it's where we will warn or fail your build if it exceeds a certain threshold of bundle size. So for example, by default, we would generate a configuration where we'd say that if your initial bundle, that being kind of the your base bundle, not including any lazy loaded components or anything like that, but just what needs to be shipped to the user to paint some UI. If that exceeds 2 megabytes, then we'll throw a warning when you build. And if it exceeds 5 megabytes, we'll throw an error. This is really useful. A lot of people like this feature, but the numbers are kind of high. Your users are going to feel pain from this long before they hit 2 megabytes. So with strict mode, we've tightened these numbers up a little bit. We've reduced it. It'll warn at 500 kilobytes and it'll error at 1 megabyte. You can still tweak these numbers up or down to your heart's content. So definitely encourage you to make these as small as you can reasonably get away with. But the purpose here is mainly about trying to kind of surface this a little bit sooner in the development process and make developers a bit more aware about the impacts their code has on bundle size. Definitely start hitting this limit rather than raising the number. I'd recommend you use things like lazy loading or switch to ESM dependencies as great examples of keeping your bundle size small and keeping your users happy. The final change is probably the most unique one, is why I saved it for last. If you look for package.json files in your project, you're going to find 2 of them. Actually, there's the kind of the base one that you know and love and you use every day. And there's this other one under source app, which is kind of weird. You've never really seen a package.json in there. And if you look at it, the entire contents are these 3 keys. I've stripped out some comments, but this is basically the entire meaningful aspect of this file. It just has a name. We've marked it private, so you don't accidentally publish it, because you don't want to do that. And it has side effects false, which is kind of this really unique key that you probably haven't seen before. So what is this side effects false, and why do we care about it? Well, I was talking earlier about tree shaking in CommonJS, and you guys really seem to like that a lot. So let's talk even more about tree shaking and the effects it has on your bundle. Specifically, this has to do with side effects. And side effects, if you're not familiar with that from a technical perspective, a side effect is essentially any kind of externally observable change that happens from running a particular operation. That seems like kind of a high-level, hand-wavy explanation, so I think it's easier to give a specific example. If you have this simple expression, sum equals 1 plus 2, this would be considered pure. It has no side effects whatsoever. This doesn't mutate or delete any kind of state in the system. No other code could see or recognize that this happened. It creates some new state. It creates the value 3, and it binds it to the name sum. But in order to see that, somebody has to pass you that state. You have to be given a reference to sum. So this is considered pure. It doesn't have side effects. Alternatively, you have something like count plus equals 1. This is an expression that does have a side effect, because anybody who has a reference to count can see that it has changed, right? We're mutating some existing state and altering it. This means that it has a side effect. Other code can be altered or manipulated by it. Now, why am I bringing this up? There's a lot of benefits to using pure code, and you can ask your friendly neighborhood functional programmer for why pure code is amazing, why you want to write everything that way. But for the purposes of Angular, and why I'm bringing it up today, is that pure operations, to oversimplify a little bit, pure operations are very easy to tree shake, while side effecting operations are very hard to tree shake. You can kind of think of it in that tree shaking is inherently trying to remove code that you don't need in your build. And answering the question, do I need this, is very easy to do with pure operations, because if sum is used somewhere, then you need it. And if sum isn't used somewhere, then you don't. And because this has no side effect, we know that, yeah, you can just remove that reference. In fact, a linter will tell you, you're not using sum, you can just remove this. And the linter is pretty sure about that, because this can only be used through this reference. Alternatively, count plus equals 1 is a lot harder to remove. Other things have reference to count. Other things may or may not care if it gets incremented in this one particular case. Tooling can't really help you there. A linter can't really tell you that it's not helpful. And even, I've definitely received pull requests, and I'm like, well, we're deleting this thing, but can we delete this thing? Does anybody actually care if this counter gets incremented in this particular case? And that's a really hard question to answer. You need a certain contextual understanding of your application that tooling just doesn't have. So just in general, pure operations are very easy to tree shake, and side effecting operations are very hard to tree shake. The last little piece has to do with top-level side effects. When I say top-level, that's kind of the best term I could come up with for essentially code that executes at the root scope of a JavaScript file. The idea being that this isn't in an exported function or an exported class, but it's just executed immediately in the file. And code that's in that kind of position is executed when you import it, is kind of how you can think about it. That by adding an import, you're executing this code. And if that top-level code has a side effect, what you've effectively done is that by adding an import, you're causing a side effect. You know, if you set a global variable on the window, then by simply importing this file, you're setting this global variable. And that's a side effect that's affecting simply because you included an import. Now, these are kind of a bunch of different kind of disparate concepts that all come together. You know, we're talking about side effects and tree shaking and top-level code. So let's give maybe a concrete example of how this hurts applications. So consider that you have a simple app where we import a symbol foo and we log it. So let's look at what exports is. What are we doing here? And exports just re-exports from two different files. So this is often called a barrel file. It's just re-exporting internal symbols. It's pretty common in libraries. Angular uses it to great effect of just like, oh, I'll take all of my internal files and I'll re-export a nice public API for users to consume. So it's a relatively common pattern in the web ecosystem. And the foo symbol probably comes from the foo file. So we can look at that and say, oh, foo is just exporting a constant string. So this seems pretty straightforward. And at this point, I can kind of understand what this program's going to do, right? This program's just going to print foo, and that should be everything. What could cache possibly be doing that could be ruining this for us? And as it turns out, quite a lot. Let's consider this implementation of cache. Kind of contrived, but hopefully good enough for illustration purposes. We have a cache variable where we just have a list of numbers. And we have two functions, one to add an item where we just push it onto the cache, and another one to get all the items where we return the cache. But I was a little bit lazy and I didn't want to have to keep clearing the cache over and over again. That's just a lot of work that I don't want to deal with. So instead I decided to set up a timer, and I said, create a timer, what setVariable does if you're not familiar with it. Create a timer, and then every 1 second clear out the cache using, again, state-of-the-art ES 2020 array clearing technology. And, you know, this seems relatively reasonable. You know, I could see somebody checking in this particular piece of code. I think if I got it as a review, I'd probably push back more on the immutable cache that we're returning. But otherwise, you know, this seems relatively straightforward. But how might a bundler treat this, and how would it tree shake this particular functionality? Well, the first thing it's going to see is that add items and get items aren't actually imported anywhere. They do get re-exported from exports, but they still never get imported. So the bundler will figure that out, and they'll say that those are safe to delete. Now then, as humans, we can look at this and say like, well, you know, we have an empty cache and nothing ever gets put in it. So clearly there's no reason to empty it out every second. You know, we should be able to just strip out this whole file and not bother with it. But a bundler can't really see it that way. A bundler sees that, well, I need to create a timer, and this timer does something to use this cache, so I need to keep all these things around. And so a bundler can't remove this solely because of this kind of top-level side effect, right? This is executed at the top-level scope. It's not an exported function or anything like that. And it's creating a side effect being start a timer and use that timer. And not only that, but we're sort of implicitly importing it because it goes through exports. So even though nobody actually imports this file, we're still kind of including it in our compilation, right? And if this is a shared library, then I can't remove this export line, but I'm still including all this extra code that doesn't actually help me in any way. And so a bundler can't strip this out, and you'll be left with the entirety of the cache. If your cache has transitive dependencies, maybe it's a cache of customers, and then customers includes Lodash to compare keys or something like that, and now you're including all of Lodash in your build, which is definitely not a good thing when you're trying to keep bundle sizes and ship to users as quickly as possible. So how do we improve this? Well, Webpack, which is one of the many build tools used by Angular, Webpack's solution to this is the side effects flag. And basically you include side effects false in your package.json. And what this does is it tells Webpack that all of the JavaScript files I have in this package do not have side effects in their top level code. And this essentially what it allows Webpack to do is treat any import statement as being pure. And because the import statement is pure, it means that it can strip out any imports that aren't actually used. So let's look back at the same example, but setting the side effects false flag. So Webpack's going to process this and going to say, okay, we're importing foo and we're logging it. So I need to know where foo is coming from. So let's look at exports. Exports re-exports two things. So Webpack's going to start processing each of these. And it's going to look at, okay, we have foo is just a string, and we're going to be exporting that. And at this point, we basically satisfied all the imports. There are no pending imports that we still need to worry about. And so Webpack doesn't even really bother looking at the cache file. It doesn't even really process it. It just kind of ignores the thing altogether. It doesn't evaluate it. It doesn't include anything in the build. I'm kind of oversimplifying here a little bit, but it's able to effectively ignore this file for the compilation. And it's able to do this because we set side effects to false. And so Webpack is able to assume that this re-export is a pure statement. And so as long as nobody imports the symbol, then I don't need any code in that file. So because of that, when a bundler processes this, the final result is just going to be one line console.log foo, as we would reasonably expect this program to be. And so in this case, the cache is properly tree shaken, properly removed from the build. So this is all great, and that's why we've kind of added this new flag, but there are some caveats to be aware of. Firstly, by adding this flag, then what that means is that you as the programmer are saying that there are no side effects I care about in this project or in this package. In fact, most likely there are side effects, because otherwise why would you need this flag? But really what you're saying is I don't care about the top level side effects in these packages. There's no tooling that validates this. Nothing can tell you if you're right or wrong. And it turns out if it turns out that you do need those things, maybe they're setting some global variable that you're reading, then your app may break as a result of this. So it is something to kind of be aware of and really to consider what parts of your app do and don't rely on top level side effects. If you really need to, one nice feature is instead of setting side effects to false, you can set it to an allow list of the particular files that you care about that do have side effects. You know, maybe the logger always logs app initialized on startup, and you really want to have that even if nobody else uses logger. Then you might mark it as being side effectful. Polyfills are another really common example of things that kind of by their very nature have to mutate global state in some means. So those are pretty common examples of having side effects that you would probably need to allow list. So that said, hopefully that gives some understanding about side effects. That point now, I'm done talking about tree shaking. I promise I won't bring it up again. But there are a few more kind of changes to the CLI to talk about that aren't related to strict mode, but just apply to all projects in general. So the first thing is that we've upgraded everybody to TypeScript 3.9. It's a relatively small release. Just kind of everything is generally faster and better. Promise.all, promise.race are a little bit better in type inference. You also get the TS expect error annotation, which I really like as a very useful way of confirming that type inference works the way that you want it to. It's kind of what I use it for, but it's kind of a niche feature of TypeScript. And also, if you use a function in a ternary, but you forget to call it, TypeScript will now throw an error in that case. So I should have put parentheses here, and TypeScript will actually throw an error and catch that particular mistake, which is really nice. But the most impactful change from going to TypeScript 3.9 is that we've been listening to the community. You know, we take your feedback seriously, and there's been a lot of people out there who have been complaining that there just aren't enough tsconfig files in their project. They really like tsconfigs and they want more of them. So we decided to add another one. We've gone from brand new project has gone from 4 tsconfigs to 5 tsconfigs. So don't say we don't listen to the community. We do. And if you try and look at what these new files are doing, basically the tsconfig.base.json is the new one. But in fact, all we've really done is rename it. What was tsconfig in v9 is now tsconfig.base. So really the new file is just the plainly named tsconfig.json. I won't show the particular file because its contents aren't really that important. But what this file's purpose is that it is a solution style tsconfig. If you've done a lot of Microsoft.NET development, they really like the concept of a solution. Basically what it means is that it's kind of a singular config that represents all of the different projects inside all different kind of applications and buildable systems within your project. And it allows editors to be much more accurate and have much more understanding about the project that you're working in. So for example, we have a tsconfig.spec.json, which is specifically for running tests. And in this scenario, we want you to use Jasmine, and we only want it to apply to .spec.ts. And this works great for running tests, but historically, editors don't look at this file, right? They don't know what tsconfig.spec.json is. This isn't a name that they recognize. But because of solution-style tsconfig, editors like VS Code are able to be a lot smarter about this. So for example, they can now take this into account, and if you have a plain test that ends in spec.ts and you use some Jasmine API like describe, that'll just work the way it always has, no problem. And if you use the same API in a non-spec file, let's say I accidentally put this in a component instead of putting it in a test, VS Code will now actually give me the red squigglies, and I'll throw an error and be like, no, you can't use this. It won't show it for imports, and it's just generally a lot smarter about this. So I don't accidentally include test code in my production build, which is really nice. Now, I actually gave a version of this talk like a month ago, and things have changed a little bit since then. So we've released this in V10. We're really excited about that. And then some members of the community kind of started to surface some issues that we weren't immediately aware of. Most notably, if you create a brand new file and import it, it doesn't show up in the auto imports list, which is really awkward. And when you create a new file, it also doesn't inherit the tsconfig option. So you get things like experimental decorators are not defined, which is kind of an awkward error that's just kind of annoying to deal with. It doesn't really mean anything useful to you as a programmer. So we've talked to the TypeScript team about this, and they're kind of aware of the concerns that we have. And so we're actually going to be rolling this back in v10.1. We've talked to the TypeScript team, they're aware of it, and they're committed to kind of patching up some of these holes and trying to make it a little bit more ergonomic for users. And hopefully at some point in the future, we'll be able to roll it forward again and be able to take advantage of this. So it's kind of an awkward feature that we're sort of already decided that we're going to be rolling it back, but we're hoping to be able to use it in the future sometime soon. So I figured I'd leave it in for that purpose. So the last few things, I'm going a little bit slower from what I initially intended, but the last couple changes to include are basically that we've modernized our default browser support. Essentially, any browsers that don't have support for ES 2015 are no longer included by default. What this means in practice is that differential loading is not needed by default. So I mean, differential loading, if you're not familiar with that particular feature, is where we would kind of build your Angular application twice. We'd build it once for newer browsers that have all the latest syntax, and it would run faster and be much smaller. And then we build it again for older browsers, and it would be a little bit slower, but more compatible with those browsers. Now we don't need to do that, so we're going to have faster builds and simpler deployment and loading mechanism, less files to deal with. Now all these changes are just by default. You can still opt into them if you really need to. You can just update your browsers list RC file and just add in whatever browsers you care about. Definitely do check in with this though, with your actual users to understand if this matters to you. We've removed these browsers because they're so infrequently used. So definitely do check your actual usage stats before just opting into all the browsers. Because odds are you really don't need to support them. We've also had extensive discussions with the community, and we've ultimately decided to deprecate IE 9, 10, and mobile. Essentially, in our discussions with partners in the community, we've kind of discovered that these older browsers of Internet Explorer just aren't worth the cost of supporting. You're talking about 0.1% of users. Microsoft itself doesn't support them. In fact, I think there's a blog post about IE 11 dropping support soon. Microsoft doesn't support them. jQuery doesn't support them. It's generally not worth the cost of supporting. And so we decided to deprecate them in V10, and we're going to drop support altogether in V11. So be aware of that. IE11 will be sticking around for at least a little while. It is off by default, so you have to opt into it, but we'll still be having support for that for at least the near future. Last little thing is that we've made some improvements to the Angular package format. If you're not familiar with that, it's essentially the format that you'll publish Angular libraries to NPM or other package managers. This includes kind of a whole bunch of different builds, like we would have UMD and ESM and other different builds, but we were able to, in V10, we were able to strip out the ESM5 and flattened ESM5 builds that we no longer need. Essentially, this is because we've changed the way that down leveling works in the Angular process. This happens now at the end of the build rather than the start of it, so libraries don't need to ship all this code. What this means in practice is that you're going to be saving about 120 megabytes of downloading just from Angular core libraries. And if you're using third-party core libraries or ship your own, you'll get even more savings there. So hopefully that will make the NPM install experience just a little bit better and just put at least a bit of a dent in the black hole that is node modules. So with all that said, if you want to update to V10 today, which I definitely encourage, you can use our ng update command that runs all of our fancy migration infrastructure and automates you, helps mitigate some of the breaking changes that we introduce and gets you onto V10 right away. If you're starting a new project, I highly encourage you to use the strict flag. We are hoping to kind of graduate some of these changes to be included by default rather than with the strict flag. So we definitely appreciate any feedback you have about that. There's also a few blog posts about V10. This talk was only about the CLI, so there are some other improvements that go into the framework and components and other things like that. So I definitely encourage you to check those out. And lastly, I am on Twitter if you want to follow me there. I tweet about Angular and web development and video games, anything else that really interests me. and I tweet unpopular opinions that I can regret years down the line. So please join me on this journey. And with that, that's pretty much everything I had here. I think, are we planning to take questions now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. Wow, this is amazing, and I hope it motivates everyone to upgrade to Angular 10. The chat is blowing up with positive comments, so that's awesome. And we do have a couple of questions. Sam, do you want to ask questions?
So there's one question from Dieter. So in Angular version 9, you can opt out of Ivy, but in Angular version 10, is it mandatory? Because to see these warnings, you have to work with Ivy, right?
No. So Ivy is still Ivy is currently the default in V9. That was kind of the big change we made. But you can in V10 you can still opt out of it. And these warnings are still independent of Ivy itself. So everything here still applies to Ivy and View Engine, as far as I'm aware. There might be some subtle differences, but I think for the most part they're feature compatible here. In this scenario. So it's still, Ivy is kind of a decoupled flag flip, separate from the V9 and V10. V9 was just kind of making it the default, and it still is in V10, but I believe you can still just opt out of it in the same way that you could before.
All right. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Dieter. If you have a follow-up question or if you have more comments, be sure to let us know. Does anybody of the panelists have a question?
I just have a comment. I like it. I liked all the strict typings and saying you guys can't do this and you can't do that. I remember when I first started using TypeScript, I actually got frustrated with the whole strict typing thing, and I wanted to use any. I was like, leave me alone, let me live my life. But as I got used to it, obviously it's better to do it that way, and it's been around for a long time. So I like the fact that you guys are turning all that on by default. And if it upsets you and it bothers you, you'll get used to it. Just embrace it.
Yeah, it's definitely super excited to see that land for the same reasons. I know I've had a similar experience of like, it's just getting in the way, but reality, a lot of that is just me not fully understanding the language and how to use it. And I definitely also just want to kind of raise a little bit more awareness about unknown as a type that I think it kind of gets overlooked quite a bit. And a lot of times is just the safer, better drop-in replacement for any for 90% of usages. So I definitely encourage that if you do feel the need for any, try out unknown first, and it's probably going to work for what you're doing. And then just kind of, if you really need to, you can upgrade it to an any, but odds are you don't need to.
All right.
Brilliant.
I had another question about the solution style TS config, but you answered that, so that's perfect. It's about the comments from the community about specific bugs with this approach, but you explained, so my question is void.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a tough decision we had to make here, and we've had some discussion with the TypeScript team, so they're definitely aware of this, and we definitely think it's a really cool feature, and we want to be able to include it. It's just some of those kind of ergonomics that have been kind of harming developers and making it just a little bit more annoying than it really should be. So we're definitely hoping to be able to get it out for real as soon as we can.
So just to recap, if I understand correctly, it will be removed from a future version, but it should come back at some point, right?
That's the expectation right now. We're already planning to remove it in the 10.1. In fact, I think the PRs have landed there. So it'll be removed in 10.1, but then hopefully once we kind of dig into this a little bit more with the TypeScript team, we can hopefully shore up some of those ergonomic challenges, and hopefully we'll be able to roll it forward again at some future version.
Well, I will post a link to the issue on GitHub for people for more information.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah,
It's a really good talk. You covered a lot of information, and but you didn't stress us out at all. You're just very clear, and that was really cool. I learned some new stuff.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I have a question left, but I'll ask Matt and Yannick first. Yannick, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering about like the side effect flag. If you want to enable it, you just turn it on and then see how your application behaves, and then start looking around in what you can turn off and turn on again, or how would you go about that?
Sure, yeah, probably one of the easiest ways is just enable it and see what happens. Definitely, if you end up with some variable about like global variable is not defined, then you probably were setting that global in a top level side effect kind of thing. You might need to either kind of allow list it through that, setting on the side effects flag that particular file where you do care about it, or re-architect your app so that it doesn't actually rely on that top level side effect. I definitely recommend that latter approach just because it'll make things more testable. It'll make things more modularized and easier to follow if you're not reliant on those kinds of side effects. And it'll all optimize better as well. So I definitely encourage that as the longer term solution. But of course, every app is a little bit different. You kind of have to evaluate exactly what the best way of handling each of these sorts of situations are. So it's takes a little bit of knowledge and investigation, but hopefully the errors will be a little bit clearer about what code is missing from your bundle that you really need to work on including and working around for this flag for.
Thanks.
Matt, do you have any questions left?
No question from my side. It was a great talk, Doug. Congrats.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, then I have a final question, Doug, if you don't mind. So NX offers caching at the CLI. So if you run a command and no files is changed, it actually gets the results from the cache. Are there any plans in Angular CLI to also offer some form of caching to speed up things like caching, or is that not planned in the current roadmap?
So to be totally honest, I'm not terribly familiar with NX. I have kind of a base level understanding of it. I haven't heard of too many discussions about implementing a caching layer within Angular itself. I know with Webpack 5, I believe, there's some kind of caching support in there that I think we're kind of exploring for the compiler level. I'm not sure exactly how that compares with NX, but I think that's kind of the initial thing that we're looking at right now. I think that's kind of hoping to fill that particular niche of caching these kinds of builds.
Yeah, basically what it does is like if you run an ng build and it's an NX build, and if you run that same command like 10 seconds later and no files have changed, they actually don't run it. It's like it's fetched from cache, and they know that no files changed, so they don't have to run the build anymore, which is convenient. Like if you do a local build, and then it's pushed to like a central repository where the files are hosted, and then the CLI or the CI system then also has to run that build. It's already done because you did it locally. I was just wondering if there's any similar plans within Angular CLI to ever do this in the future.
So that's even like a cloud cache. I don't think the Webpack cache can quite do the cloud aspects of that. Obviously, if you use Bazel kind of gives you those sorts of features out of the box, which kind of also has its own remote cloud and remote execution environment, which is kind of Google most notably uses that internally, and there are a number of external customers that do a similar thing. So I think with Bazel you can accomplish that, but I don't think we have anything quite like that feature intended out of the box for Angular right now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, the chat was blowing up, so really appreciate your thoughts and insights. Thank you. It was very fascinating also to learn like how difficult. We have one more question, but also like how difficult it can be.
I'll try to make the question from what I believe it should be. So Darks84 has like a socket.io problem after upgrading to ng version 10. I think the socket.io is probably for the for live reload in the browser. So perhaps any insights from the panelists or something similar that happened when upgrading to version 10 with live reload in the browser?
I haven't.
I know there's an issue similar that was discussed. I don't know if it was open or closed or what happened with it.
I haven't heard about this. If there's not you can definitely file a bug with Angular itself, and we can look into it a little bit more. I haven't seen anything like this go by, but it's always possible I missed something. I'm not 100% up to date on all of the issues. So definitely can file an issue about that, and we can look into it a little bit more. I'm just not aware of anything out of the box.
Okay.
I can't believe you don't have these memorized.
We have a bit too many issues for that, I think. I do look at them weekly, but I don't always cover all of them.
Thank you so much, Doug. Wow. Truly, thank you. And then, if no questions are left, we can segue into our second speaker of today, our special guest, Natalia. And she will be announced by Bonnie. Bonnie, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I roped her into this, so it's the least I can do. Our second guest, Natalia Venditto, is a principal front-end software engineer and Google developer expert for Angular. I love her because she's generous with helping people in our community, and she's friendly and funny. She's super smart, and she knows, I don't even know how many languages she speaks. Today, she's going to teach us what schematics are and how they can help us in our developer workflows. So let's give it up for Natalia.
Thank you. And thank you, Doug. That was amazing. And now I have a very high bar to match that with my talk. So usually when I talk about schematics, I have some cool slides, and I explain about it and the vocabulary you need to know, and give it a bit of background so you understand it, because it is a complex topic. But this time I decided I'm going to do it different, and I'm going to jump straight to the console, and we're going to the terminal, and we're going to generate schematics. Just a couple tiny remarks that are important to know. What are schematics? So schematics are code generators. If you are familiar with, for example, Yeoman or anything, or maybe archetypes, for example, or any tool that you pass commands and they generate artifacts, well, that's schematics. So they are based on descriptive code. You describe what you want to do, you describe what you want to generate, and then they go ahead and I'm not sharing. In a second I will share. And then they act upon these commands that are passed via the CLI usually. So now I'm going to share. Thank you, team, for letting me know that I had not enabled that yet. Let's go ahead and do that. And yes, and what we're going to do, first of all, is we're going to remind the people listening to this talk or watching this talk that you need some dependencies, you need some stuff to be installed globally in your system in order to start working with schematics. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to check exactly what I have here. And for that, we're going to check the global dependencies with a depth of 0, because we don't want to know the dependencies of the dependencies. And for that, we are going to see when it lets me, well, there are some stuff that are not related to this talk, but if you see over here, I have the Angular Dev Kit, I have Angular Dev Kit schematics, and the schematics CLI, and obviously the Angular CLI and the core, and I'm on npm 6.10.2, and for this right now, for this talk, let's clear a bit this, I am in Node version 12.8.0. LTS is also good to go. So if you wanted to write a schematic right away, you would need those dependencies. And if you didn't catch them because I cleared the console, it's not a problem. I am writing right now a series of blog posts that are going to be in Angular in depth, but also there is a course in Angular Nation that you can go to that I have also authored, and you can follow this through again. But let's go ahead and create a blank schematic with the schematic CLI. And for that, we're going to write this schematics blank. And we're going to pass a name. And in this case, we can call it Angular Belgium. And boom, I'm going to hit enter. And if you see, it's schematics working on itself, and it's creating all these files. It's creating Angular Belgium, the README, the ignore, blah, blah, blah. So what you see, or what you can notice, it's that it is effectively an npm package, and it has a bit more to it, and we're going to go to the, I'm going to go here. This is the app I created to test it later. We're gonna go here, and because it's recently created, I couldn't have it open. And we're going to analyze a bit what we have. Like I said, we have a package JSON with the dependencies that it needs to work. And then we also have a source folder with a Angular Belgium folder, which is the name we passed as option. And inside of it, we have this index.ts file. And we also have this very, very important file over here that is called collection.json. So let's first go to the index.ts. Index.ts is considered the entry point of the schematic. And when you generate one blank, what you get is this, this rule, this function that takes a tree and returns a tree. So it takes a tree, and then over here you're going to write the transformations or describe the transformations you want to apply to this tree, and it's going to apply them in a virtual tree or virtual tree, and then it's going to return them already or return this tree already transformed. We're going to talk a bit more about these transformations, how they are atomic, how they have some important types. But we are going to also want to check the collection. So when we generate a blank schematic, apart from the entry point, this schematic rule, we also get a collection. And if I had many schematics in this collection, I would have them over here. Like, I would have another object here called whatever the schematic was called. We're going to add a new one later to see how this collection gets updated. And basically, the only two properties we have over here is the description. A blank schematic, obviously, there is not much the schematic can know about itself right now. And this important reference, which is the factory. So it's telling me the entry point for the Angular Belgium schematic is the index and the function Angular Belgium. And if you notice, it has already applied some of the chain utilities or string utilities, that are available together with the schematic API. And because I passed, when I created the schematic, if you remember, I created it as Angular -Belgium. But now when we go to the IDE, we see, or we go to the function, we see that we have already applied a convention here. And this is why schematics are so important and so useful, because we can take advantage of schematics to standardize how we do things across many projects. If we are working alone, if we are freelancers, consultants, we probably have some stuff that we like to do in the same way, also following the Angular style guide to make sure that we abide by the rules or the recommendations of the Angular team, of the Angular community. And if we are working across a very, very large organization, we probably also want to standardize best practices. We want to enforce some patterns because they work better, because we have demonstrated that they make us more productive, or that the code is cleaner. And we can do that if we, instead of creating, for example, projects or structures, or even modifying code, instead of doing it manually, we do it, or we automate these tasks with schematics. And this is, I think, one of the most remarkable things about schematics, that you can use them to create large structures and have, again, very standardized way of doing things, that you don't have to document, writing tons of documentation and then having your colleagues read it on top of the Angular style guide. But also for smaller tasks, you can also take advantage of it. So now that I mentioned some of the advantages of schematics, and I'm going here without any kind of script, I'm trying to do this as spontaneously as possible and see how far we can get, because schematics is also a broad topic, and maybe in the time we have, we cannot see too much of it, but we're going to try for this introduction to get you going. So then you go back to your computer, maybe not today, it's too late, at least here in Europe, but then you go to your computer and try and write your own schematics. So, okay, we have created this blank schematic, and like I said, we got this entry point, we have this rule, okay, and we have this, basically a function that takes, again, a tree or source. The tree is conformed precisely by that, a source or base, which are the files that are already in your file system, and then the staging area, which is like a, I don't know if to call it a virtual copy of whatever you have there in the base, but it is definitely something like a Git index, where you virtually or in an abstract way maybe move this structure and apply certain transformations. I made this sort of schema of how things work. Imagine you have your schematic over here, and we're going to see right now if we wanted to create a structure, how would we go about it. But basically the base is that truly exists physically, and then it's virtually moved to the staging area where the rules are applied, and then it returns us this new tree with all these transformations. So let's go back to the IDE, and obviously this is not doing anything very interesting. It's in fact doing nothing. And what we want to also see, or we want to remember, is that because it's a package, we need to make sure that the dependencies are installed. And let's do that quickly. Okay. No, this is because there is a package that was linked and now it cannot be found, but let's just do this. This is unrelated to the talk. Don't worry about it. I didn't force it. I don't know why it's requesting. Sorry, because I'm not inside of the schematic. Okay, so maybe it's a bit late and I'm already losing a bit of track, but let's get inside of the schematic package. We called it Angular Belgium, Angular Belgium, and it's not right now. Yes, I didn't understand what I was trying to do because I was trying to install something that didn't exist. There was no package, and now let's also build it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to execute this schematic from the schematic CLI with schematics. With these commands, we are going to pass, first of all, the collection, but because we are already inside of the schematics root, we don't need to pass the schematics name, schematics collection name. So we pass just the folder we're at, and then the schematic name, Angular Belgium. And it tells me, obviously, there is nothing to be done because we don't have any transformations applied, any rules. But let's try to make it a little bit more interesting. And first of all, I wanted to show you how, if we right now, being inside of the folder of the schematic, want to create yet or add a new schematic to this collection, we just go ahead and do the same that we did. Schematics blank, and we just call it schematic Netherlands, for example. And then what it does is it creates a new source for Angular Netherlands with its entry point again, with its this rule factory, and it also updates the collection in order to make sure that this new schematic is known to the CLI when it's running the schematics collection. So now we're going to go back to the rule factory over here, and we're going to make this a little bit more interesting by passing some options. So we're going to say that we have a const path, or let's call it name, that is a string, and that equals our options name, and that we have a const path that is also a string, and that equals our options. Okay, and now we're going to say, okay, schematics, please create for me, create a file that the path to this file is going to be precisely the path we pass as option. So we're going to say, let me do one more thing. Because it's a path, we're going to want to normalize it. And it's not importing this for me, so we're going to import normalize from path over here. And we're going to say, okay, tree, please create this, this file called whatever we get from path .md. And the contents for this file, I want it to be welcome to our name, which is, okay, so go back and concatenate this. Welcome to our name. And we can even do something cooler and say, okay, name is not just name, or whatever we pass as option name. We can even camelize as well. Camelize options name. And now this is going to be a bit harder because I don't remember exactly package. Where is it? Some utilities package. So let me take a look over here. So this is camelize from the dev kit. Yeah, dev kit core source utilities utils. Thanks. Okay, so now we have that written. We are going to go back to our console. We're going to make sure that we build this. If we had a setup, obviously we could have a watcher, but we don't have that because we just created this package. And we are going to, we're going to again execute this schematic. Okay, it says it cannot read the property replace of undefined. Why? Because it's expecting us to pass a string to be able to do stuff with it. In this case, probably I said camelize, and it's getting nothing. So what the schematic is now expecting is that we pass options from the console, but it's not really telling us that in a nice way. So if I was a developer that doesn't usually work with a CLI, and or I'm a very junior developer, I probably wouldn't understand what's going on, and we're going to fix that in a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and pass these options. We said that we had some options path, and we're going to call it Belgium. And then we have another option called name. And let me see what I wrote. So it does something that makes name. Okay, so let's maybe call this. Let's call this Belgium, and let's call this Brussels. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run the schematic. And it says that it created a file called Brussels.md, and I want to go to the IDE and see if that's true. And as you can see, it's not true because I didn't even pass any depth, so it should have done it in the root, but there is no file created over here. And why is that? That's because when you run schematics from the CLI, by default, it's in dry run mode, so it doesn't do any actual modifications. And this is good, or transformations to your file system. And this is good because you can run the schematics that run synchronously one after another. If you had many rules or many functions chained, you could, or even many schematics chained to one another, you could execute them synchronously one after another and see that you have no errors like I got earlier. And then when everything works as you expected and you get the output that you were expecting, you can then go ahead and pass the dry run false flag. And now it tells me it created this this Brussels.md file, and I want to go and see if that's true. And wow, and it's not true. Oh yeah, it's true. It's not. Git is not marking it as green. I was like, oh, what's going on? Okay, and yeah, it says as content, welcome to Belgium. So everything worked as expected. So these schematics, when they run, let me go back to where I was. When they run, where is my console? When they run over here. They run in a context, as you can see over here. So this schematic context provides some metadata, some utilities. And for example, one thing we could do is say, okay, where are we? Are we even doing anything? Are we even inside of this function? So we could have access to the logger, for example, and output some information. I am now running the Belgium schematic. And I could say, okay, let's build it again and see how this works. So let's go back and run it. And again, we have an error. And this error is because, as you can see, we already have this file. And if you have a file, you can't possibly try to recreate it again without, I don't know, deleting it or maybe catching that exception in order not to have an error like this one. So what we're going to do is also go back to our schematic, and we're going to use another method of the tree, and we are going to say if tree exists. So let's do this first. Const file name equals this. Okay. Let's also make it a string to be compliant. And if tree exists, file name Let's better do this. Const is file and 3x is file name, and then we say okay, if it doesn't exist, let's create it, and if it doesn't, let's throw a new schematic exception and say, oops, that file already exists. And now we're going to do this again. We're going to build it. We're going to run it. And oops, that file already exists. Because it does, let's go ahead over here and, where is it? And delete it and run it again. And now I am running the Belgium schematic, and I am creating as a schematic Brussels MD. And like we said before, there is a strict check right now, and we want to make sure that our types are good. And obviously, when the schematics gets generated as a blank schematic, it doesn't know what types you want for your options. So it will say that your options are any type, but you should, as a best practice, always create like a, let's call it Belgium options. Oh, that's a big Belgium options. Model.ts, and we're going to export this interface, Belgium options, and we're gonna say that we have a path that is a string, and we have a name that is also string, and then we're going to go ahead and import this type over here. Belgium options from the Belgium options model. And now we are able to replace this type from any to Belgium options. And now we are more compliant with our best practices. I know this is annoying, but we need to build it. And yeah, that's all cool, but I don't want to get these errors like that because they are super stressful for me, so much red over there. So what I want to do is I want to have a proper validation of all the data that I'm passing to my schematic. And how do I do that? Well, I'm going to do a trick because it's a lot to write or to type. And I'm going to copy this from the schematics from Angular Nation that I created for that course. And I'm going to paste it over here. So in order to validate your schematic, you can create a new file called schema.json. And over here, we have also a name and path properties. And it says, well, a description, which in this case is whatever, right? Path to the file. And the name is some random name. And we have defined that it's a string, and that the default source for this for these two right now at the moment is an argument vector from the CLI. And we can even specify or describe what is the index, what is the position that is going to be passed. And here, over here, we can also say if this is required or not in order for the schematic to run. So this makes these options mandatory, and if you don't pass them, the schematic will fail. But in order for the schematic to know where its schema.json is at, because you could have it anywhere, we need to let the collection know. And we're going to do that here, and we're going to say schema equals, and we're gonna copy this to make it easier and faster. Well, I think okay, and just schema.json. Okay, and now if we don't pass it or pass a different thing than it is expecting, let's delete this. It says over here, schematic input does not validate against the schema path Brussels. Okay, it has the path, but it doesn't have the option name, and it should have a required property name because we made them both to be required. So now we have a schematic. We have used some of the methods from the tree interface, create and also exists, for example, and we have validated our schematic against the schema. And what I want to do right now is, okay, we're running the schematic from the schematic CLI, but what I want to do is to actually run it from an Angular application to see how it works over there. And what I'm gonna do, this is just in order to make it work, it's part of the setup. I'm going to link or create a symlink to this package. And let me copy the name. And then I created an Angular application over here. Okay, what is it expecting? Okay. Sorry about that. And I'm going to link this package to this Angular app to this package in the Node version that I am at. This version 12. Let's link it, and now I can execute, or I can run ngGenerate directly from my application as if it was a whatever dependency, any package. So what we're gonna do is we are going to also install it because it gets added to the package JSON, but we want to make sure that it is available, and it has happened to me that sometimes it's not there. So now we can run ngGenerate, and I am sure everyone is familiar with ngGenerate because we use it every day when we do ngGenerate component, or when we do ngGenerate pipe or module or whatever other entity you are trying to create with the CLI. What you do is you run schematics, and ngGenerate, what is expecting is the name of the schematic. In this case, we're going to also pass the collection, which is Angular Belgium, and the name of the schematic, Angular Belgium, and it has a cannot be resolved. Okay, for further details, this was what I was. Maybe it's not called Angular Belgium. I always forget. Yes, it's called Angular Belgium. So we linked it. And do I have a typo? ngGenerate cannot be resolved. Collection Angular Belgium. Let me see that. Yes, Angular Belgium. The collection is always called as the first schematic in the collection. So Angular Belgium, let's do this again. Maybe we want to unlink it. This is typical or classic from the demos. Something goes on. And then when we really want to show the cool stuff, we don't have it. So let's again, let me do again an npm run build over here just in case. Sometimes strange things happen with the compilers. Doug knows more about that. And now let's link it. Yes, okay, node modules and ngGenerate. You generate the collection Angular Belgium and the schematic Angular Belgium. Yeah, okay, so you see, you reinstall it and or relink it, and now it's working. And it says it doesn't validate against the schema because we're not passing the right options. So let's do that. Path Belgium and name Brussels. And now it should work. I am running the Belgium schematic. I am creating Belgium MD. Let's verify that's true. So I need to go to the here, my B app. And as you can see over here, yes, the Belgium MD file is created. So basically what we did here is we created a custom schematic which works or is executed from the or on the application from the Angular CLI, just as any of the schematics that we are very familiar with, like ngnew or ngGenerate, or also ngadd or ngupdate. So again, one last thing, one tiny thing, because I think I'm super over time. Let's add an alias to this schematic, aliases. And aliases takes an array of strings, and we're going to call this schematic, we're going to call it, I don't know, I wish I knew something very typical from Belgium, but the only thing I can think of is beer, because the Belgian beer is super good. So let's call it beer, why not? And right now we are going to, okay, what's going on? Oh. And right now we're going to have to, now we're gonna have to reinstall this because, or not, let me see. Well, the file should exist. Let's call it something else so we don't have this issue. Let's call it, again, Netherlands. And let's call this by the alias, and we're going to say that the collection is the same, but the schematic we want to run right now is beer. And boom. So I am running the Belgium schematic, but we are creating Netherlands with an M at the end. And I think, guys, this is it. Let me know, because I assume I am very much over time. I don't know if I can tell the audience more.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Wow, very impressive. It was great to see. And yeah, thank you for sharing some Belgian beer with our Netherlands friends now. I think I really appreciate that. So it was super awesome to see how, how we can use those schematics. And I think everyone will be inspired to write their own scripts now to start using the schematics. So the chat is also blowing up, and we do have some questions. So if you're open to some questions, Sam can...
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. So several questions. The first question is from Jonas. What would be a good approach to create a new schematic that slightly differs or extends from an Angular schematic, like a component? For example, a create read, update, and delete schematic for a given type.
Well, basically, you can read your tree, and you can. You just need to be creative. Whatever you want to do with schematics, you can basically do, as long as it is. All those things you cannot do from Angular, right? You want to access your file system, you want to read the Angular configurations and create some new components. I am not sure if this is what he wants or what he does not want to do. That slightly differs, extends from an Angular schematic. If you wanted to extend from an Angular schematic like component, for example, there is a schematic external schematic function method where you can pass a schematic name, for example, component, and the options as well. And then you could chain it to another schematic where you do whatever you want to do. So you invoke this schematic with this function, external schematic, and then you chain it to another schematic that you wrote, presumably to do whatever transformations in the file system you need, be it on Angular configuration files, be it you want to create new entities, new code, new artifacts, or whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah. Okay. Jonas, if that answers your question or not, perhaps you can ask more questions. We'll go to the next question from Arno. Is there a way to generate the contents of the created files from some kind of template? Or is adding everything to the content parameter the only way?
No. This is what I wanted to show, but I was a little bit stressed that I was over time. You can basically use the template syntax in the files you create. And if you allow me, I can go and show a little bit, and we can do it even over here because it's already written. But if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to create more files, if you wanted to recreate a structure, you just have to create a files folder. You don't have to call it files, but if you call it something different, then you have to reconfigure. You have to go to your TS configuration and make sure that this is excluded from compilation. And then, for example, in this case, we are passing the option name, right? And we are concatenating it to the dasherize method. And we can potentially concatenate as many functions as we want, even functions that we create in the schematic rule. And then over here, if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to get the contents from some sort of options or from something that you define, you just need to use the regular template syntax. So you could say name here, and it would be printed. If name would be equal to something, I don't know, coming from an API, content coming from an API, that would also get printed when you execute the schematic. I hope that answers the question.
All right. Are there any questions from the panelists? Matt, I think you're muted. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So a quick one. There is anything that I have to do if I want to use my schematic that I created with Angular console, or it will magically show up in the Angular console?
If you create a schematic, if you have it locally, you would have to link it like I did. But ideally, you give it ng-add support, for example, and you add it with ng-add, the name of your schematic, for example, or your package, and then you would have it available. You will not just have it magically available. You would have to install it as a dependency of your project in order to be able to use it and use the available schematics in it, in your collection.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, panelists? I think Doug has a question.
Yes. Go
I
ahead,
have a
Doug.
comment and a question, which is, firstly, it was a really cool talk. Thank you. I know how stressful live coding can be, so that was really well done.
Thank you.
Very interesting. The one comment I just want to point out is that not only just for our schematics useful for generating code, but they're also really helpful for migrating code as well. Like when you run ng update and you're updating to the latest version of CLI and things like that. We're also running schematics under the hood. All those migrations are just schematics. And it's definitely a really cool use case that I've seen. But the question I have for you is that you mentioned kind of the best practice, I guess, of defining the arguments and interface and schema and whatnot. And so I was curious if you had any other kind of best practices that you've seen that you use yourself or that you would encourage others to use. It's kind of a vague question. I apologize for that. But just kind of any interesting best practices you have.
I think the best practice I try to sum up, always try to type your options, always have validation schemas, because obviously this was a very simplistic case or use case, but when you have a very complex library and you're going to have, I don't know, maybe a dozen of schematics in there, you want to make sure that the errors are easy to understand for the developers, because in the end, the users of schematics are other developers, and you want to make sure that they have a good experience. And yes, in general, just look around there are some very good libraries that implement schematics material, and some other libraries, even the CLI itself. What I would do, or what I did even when I was trying to learn schematics on my own, was to explore the Angular CLI component or module, and see what were the best practices implemented and try to emulate them. Yeah, and also, like you said, it's very useful to add libraries, also to migrate code, and to make sure that developers don't have to go through a manual setup in order to do this or to perform these tasks.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
Yannick, Bonnie, do you have any questions?
I just have to say that was very cool. That was Natalia live coding like a ninja, and that was very smooth.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, extra kudos for live coding, live on YouTube. So really extra kudos. I do have a final question if no one else has any final questions. So we saw that you used inputs as arguments to the command line. I was wondering, is it also possible to create like a menu where you prompt the user for inputs instead of passing arguments to the command line?
Exactly. Yes, that you do basically from the schema. If we would go here and we would just remove this, for example, and we say, okay, this is a next prompt, and the type is sorry, the type is string. So let's say what is your path? Then it would prompt us in the console to, let me just not make this required. Not even this. Let's remove this. And let's re-execute it and remove this. And then it's prompting us to pass a path. And then we have like different, 3 different types. Like we have confirmation, which would be a yes or no. We would have a list where we can create an enum, and it would display a list of possible options, or a string or textual input that can be a number as well. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, super. Thank you so much for showing. And we have a tweet here. No? Okay.
Yeah, I was a little bit too eager on that.
Okay.
That was going to be a surprise, but okay. First time doing this. So I just wanted to share this, that we get feedback on Twitter. So Melissa here says that the first conference feeling in months. Thanks NGBCon for making this possible, and all kudos to the speakers. Great talks. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to add to that. I'm looking at the live chat here as well, and so many people sending love and kudos to you also. And again, if you enjoyed what you saw and heard, please don't forget to add the applause to the chat as well. So thank you both, Doug and Natalia, for sharing your thoughts and insights with us this evening. Before we sign off, is there anything you would like to ask or to our community, or where can people learn more about the work that you're doing, or do you have like a special request for our community? Natalia, do you want to
write more schematics? Yeah. Yes, like I said, I'm going to be publishing a series of posts from zero to upgrading a library with schematics, and hope they're useful. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Doug, you wanna add something?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know I would definitely use that schematics. That'd be really helpful to me. Yeah, I would just encourage people to try out the V10 CLI. Definitely update there. If you're making a new project, really try out strict mode. We're really excited to hear feedback about that. We want to kind of get as much feedback as we can about strict flag and try and hopefully graduate some of those changes out and make them by default. So we're always super excited to hear about that. And, definitely build more Angular apps and use more Angular tools. Hopefully we can make our lives a little bit better as developers.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that sums it up really, really well. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope you had a great time, and I hope that you learned something new. So have an awesome day and evening in Belgium, morning, midday in California there for you, Doug. So thanks again for joining, and see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.